Hi, everyone. Welcome to our weekly American Mussar gathering. I'm here with Lila, the occasionally spiritual kitty who wants to join us, at least for the moment. This week, we will be focusing on the soul trait of Yirah, which is kind of complicated. It's the only one I give the Hebrew name for out of the gate because it doesn't really translate. It can be fear of the divine, it can be awe of the divine. It's really both of them together. We'll get started the way we always do with a short meditation. So I invite you to relax back in your chair and close your eyes and take a deep breath through the nose and hold, and exhale through the mouth and hold, and inhale through the nose and hold, exhale through the mouth and hold. And as you go at your own pace of inhaling and exhaling, if thoughts should come into your head, just observe them and let them pass. Like watching a car moving past on the road. Now is not the time for solving problems. Right now, all you need to do is inhale through the nose and hold, and exhale through the mouth and hold. And on your next inhale, say to yourself, Shema. And on the exhale, listen. Shema. Listen. In Shema, we're listening deeply, without judgment, without offering advice. In Shema, we are listening with an open heart. Shema, listen. And when you're ready, you may open your eyes. Hey, welcome, Stephanie and Joanne. I don't know if you could hear her or not, but like every time I would speak and then pause, she would let out a little meow. So it's like we were having a little conversation. So yes, you really had a lot to say today. So she distracted me. It was my hope in the meditation that we could kind of, I was going to say a little bit about focusing on the divine or something greater than ourselves, but I got distracted away from that. So sorry about that. If you tuned in for that part of the meditation, I was cat distracted. You know, we talk about the Yetzer Tov, the good inclination, which kind of leads us in the right direction, or the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, or the hostile impulse, which leads us in a not great situation. We can tend more towards selfishness. Or there's the third force, which I think I'm the only one who writes about that, which is the Yetzer Hakiti, which is the inclination to become distracted by the cat. So that's kind of where I am a little bit today. But I digress. So let's kind of jump in and get going. Before we have our opening question, just want to once again remind you of the schedule. So today and next week, we'll be concluding our seventh Mussar cycle on Yirah, sort of focusing on awe and fear. So May 30th, that is a little bit to be determined whether we'll meet. I'm kind of leaning towards it, and I'm sort of thinking about maybe some kind of celebration as a community of my ordination, if people would be into that, but I think that might be kind of fun.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to be on vacation the first 3 weeks in June. And Mussar Cycle 8 is definitely for sure. I think the timing is TBD. Also, eight is kind of an interesting number in Judaism because seven is like the days of the week. It's sort of a normal cycle. And when you go into the eighth day, like the Kabbalists think that's kind of when you're breaking time. That's when you're breaking the cycle. That's when you're kind of entering into something new. So it's kind of interesting. That'll be the first cycle where I'll be an ordained rabbi. So I'm sort of thinking like how we might enter into that and properly kind of connect in that way. So we'll see. So stay tuned for that. Any questions on the schedule? Okay, so the last couple weeks we've been practicing equanimity, and I'm curious, like, how did equanimity show up for you? Did you try a practice? Susan, I don't know the degree that you're kind of really new to Mussar or been doing it for a while, so you can engage or not, kind of what might have shown up for you in the last week. And I know also Wendy had a question related to equanimity as well.
I do. And sorry about the mask, guys, but I don't look good. I was reading your book, Greg, and I noticed that in the section on awe, we have the circle. Remember the circle? We could fill out, we could say where we stood on the spectrum of humility, patience, enthusiasm, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And it would fill it in. And then equanimity. I was thinking, well, equanimity is balance. So I went back to the spectrum, but it does have a spectrum. But I was thinking, can you really have too much equanimity?
Yeah, so equanimity is kind of it's a sense of centeredness. It's a sense of yeah, it's a sense of centeredness. And I think if we have too much equanimity, we can become sort of too complacent with the way the world is. It can almost move into indifference, where it's like, oh yeah, I'll just roll with the flow, and indifference is not where we want to be. We want to be kind of engaged with the world, and so that's kind of what the practice teaches.
Okay, good, thank you.
Yeah, and like if we see a massive injustice, for example, we don't want to be okay with that. We want to have some reaction. And similarly, to little equanimity, that's where we can get really frantic, anxious, etc. I think this is Paul, I'm guessing. See, you're back home now.
Yeah. This is not just AI showing me here right now. This is real me. So yeah, I was out in California for a couple of weeks, just got back on Tuesday. I think, it's interesting. The first week I was there, just my mom and me, and we get along really well together, and equanimity is an easy balance to have. Although, as I'm sure you've heard, we had a death in the family here. So at one point, I ended up going down to a place, for those of you in Southern California, called Crystal Cove down in Newport Beach. And it's a lovely place. I went down, and there I was able to just feel very, very centered. I took photographs, which is always very centering for me, doing sort of artwork. And that was lovely. So then my brother and sister-in-law arrived halfway into my trip, and it's always fun to be with them. And it's the first time since before the pandemic that I had seen them, and first time that my mom had seen them since before the pandemic in person. So that was good. But equanimity was very difficult to find because it was always a lot of activity going on. But I did find that there were times when I was talking with my brother, and it was just really very relaxed with us, and it's not often like that. He was like on vacation instead of him hosting things like he would normally do. So I was able to lean into that time with him and to just be with him in a way that I don't often get to have. And that was something that gave me some sense of equanimity, even when there was a lot of, not chaos, just a lot of excitement going on.
Yeah.
So that was my experience the last couple of weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And one of the things that reminds me of one of the texts that we looked at for equanimity is it's not, it's about being at peace with our emotions, whatever arises. And there could still be chaos, but we can find, equanimity, in a variety of ways and on a variety of levels. And it sounds like you did that, which is really cool. Just want to welcome Sarah and Joanne and Barbara to the call. Nice to see you all. Bonnie.
So it has been really obvious to a number of my friends that I have too much on my plate. And I keep saying, stop making faces, Sarah. I know you agree. And I keep saying, yes, yes, I'm taking this off. And a friend of mine, we had Yom HaZikaron into Yom Ha'atzmaut. It's a magnificent way that our community does this. And it's really beautiful. And so at the Yom Ha'atzmaut celebration Monday, one of my friends really called me on the carpet. And she was absolutely right. And I knew that I was just trying to do too much. I don't know who I was trying to prove, except maybe to myself. But at the same time, I have 2 new fundraising clients that fell out of the sky. And I'm enjoying them. And I made a real concerted effort to go back to these nonprofits that I've been volunteering with, because I really thought my consulting practice was over, to say, this is what I can do. Not this is what I can't do. This is what I can do for this event. And I've been really clear. This is really unusual for me. And to be able to not feel that what I said I could do 4 or 5 months ago was set in stone. So it's really been a work in progress. Not perfect, but I'm getting better. And I saw an email today about a safe park that we do in the South Bay. And I'm not responding. I'm not saying I can do anything. Just need to be able to say it's enough. So that's where I've been working on equanimity.
Thank you, Bonnie. Well done. And we had talked about 2 ways of practicing equanimity, sort of the direct practice of equanimity, which looks a lot like meditation, meditative type practices to just become centered and calm, but also the indirect practice, which is we practice another soul trait to take away things that disturb our equanimity. So for you to kind of set some boundaries, to practice silence by speaking out, that's a wonderful equanimity practice of the kind of indirect kind. And Paul's example of going out and taking some photos is maybe a more direct practice of equanimity, or sitting with his brother. So wonderful. Anyone else care to share or check in? Okay, well, let's start to explore Yirah a little bit. I'm going to share the screen again. Okay, so as I mentioned in our little introduction, Yirah does not translate directly to English, and it can be translated as either fear or awe. And unfortunately, it shows up a lot actually in the liturgy. It shows up a lot in the Jewish Bible. And unfortunately, it's usually translated as fear. So, for example, in Proverbs, Yirah of the divine is the beginning of wisdom. Usually that is, fear of the Lord, fear of the divine is the beginning of wisdom. But if we translate it as awe of the Lord, awe of the divine is the beginning of wisdom. I'd like you to think about that for a moment and what sort of, there's a certain relationality to something greater than ourselves, and we all may be at different places about what God is, if God is, but for whatever that might mean to you, what is this kind of, how might the relationship be different with fear if we kind of focus on the fear side or focus on the awe side? I'm going to stop the share and I will actually cut and paste this into the into the chat. And then we'll hear from Joanne. Joanne and then Carrie and then Susan.
Well, I think maybe Yirah is a combination of fear and awe. I mean, that's what I think. There was something in Leviticus recently. I'm sorry, I'm trying to get the hand off here, but it's not coming. All right. That was in Kedoshim was the Parsha a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
And it says, Yirah ima v'abba. You should have Yirah towards your parents. Now, in the Ten Commandments, it says kavod, abba ve'ima. So some of the commentary is, usually people have more kavod for their mother and not as much for their father, and more maybe fear or awe of their father. So they reversed the order and put the mother first. Because you should also have Yirah towards your mother. Because it depends on your mother. You might have that anyway.
Yeah.
But I guess my point being, I don't know. I think it's like a combination because
Yeah, absolutely.
just fear is just like, oh, I can't sin because the blah blah blah, but and I don't know if that, unless you think you're going to die from whatever you were going to do. I don't know how, but or there is a lot of awe just of nature and thunder and lightning and events, volcanoes and things like that.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Joanne. Carrie.
I prefer to stick with the awe and not the fear. It makes living much easier and much more hopeful. And I mean, there is a lot of fear, but it's not from God, it's from humans. So I prefer to, I am in awe. I am in awe of the universe, of God, of this incredibly complex, fascinating bunch of atoms that we reside. It just amazes me. So that's my path for this.
Thank you, Carrie. Anyone else? Susan, I saw your hand pop up and down. Yes.
So I also prefer to think of it as awe. I can see how fear and awe are related, that you can sometimes maybe be so overwhelmed by something, so in awe of it. I mean, the volcano, I think, is an active volcano, I think, is a good example. But I find that in my life that fear it prevents me from coming close. Like I can't come close to a God that I fear, but I can to a God that I'm in awe of.
Love that. Thank you, Susan. Yeah, and I like the way also you reminded us all that it's also a sensation in the body. Both fear and awe are, it's not just intellectual. There's something embodied about it. Kind of the way equanimity is embodied, and I touched on this in the email today. Wendy.
Sorry, guys. Well, I guess I think of fear as a little something different. I think of fear as actually knowledge and knowing something, because a little kid, they don't know what's going to happen. They might just go walking out into the street. But if they have knowledge that a car might come along and then what might happen, then it's like, I think fear of the divine is like our weapon against the evil inclination in a
Mm.
way. When you fear the divine, it's not like you're afraid of God, I don't think. I think what it means is that you have gathered all of that wisdom and all of that knowledge that you can from Torah and from just the divine, and like Carrie was saying, just the world, the atoms, the universe. And then you know so much more. And that is your tool, because you have to make decisions about going ahead with the inclination, evil inclination versus the good. So I don't think of fear as just being like really afraid of something. I don't know. That's just the way I've always thought about it.
Yeah, thank you. And there's something we're going to touch on a little bit more next week, is I kind of sometimes think this is fear of consequences. Like, you have all this knowledge, and at some point you put that to use, and it's like, oh, well, if I go down this road, something undesirable is going to happen, which, you could say the Torah uses a reward and punishment, talks about that a lot. But like, if you think of that as a metaphor just for consequences, it's important to know. And I think that's kind of part of what you were getting at, if I was understanding.
It is. It really is. Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much. Paul.
Yeah, well, what came to mind for me that is really certainly embodied, was embodied for me. I was about 15 or 16 years old, and I was with my family. We were camping out in Zion National Park, far away from any lights anywhere. It was a beautiful, crystal clear, very, very dark night, moonless night. And I was sleeping out so that I could look up into the sky. And it was so clear. I felt, and I could see so much of it, that I felt like I could almost float up into or fall into the sky. And when I allowed myself to feel like that sense of, I don't know, connection, or how close it was to me, there was both fear and awe. But it was a tingling, it was definitely a certain sensation in my chest and belly, that was not, it was not comfortable, but it was also wasn't like I was afraid of. It wasn't like I was simply afraid of falling. It was just that it was unbelievably amazing just to think of that, to think of being out there and to be part of this part of my world that I would so rarely really take time to appreciate. So it was quite something.
Thank you, Paul, for sharing your raw experience. Anyone else? Okay, well, I also in my email promised excerpt from my friend's thesis about surfing, Jewish surfers, and that I did not forget. So we will get to that piece now. So may I have a volunteer to unmute and read this first reading? We'll read the first one, we'll talk about it, then we'll read the second one, and kind of put these two texts in conversation. I cannot see all of you, so feel free to just unmute and read aloud.
I'll read it.
Here. Thanks, Stephanie.
One way we can experience God is through the lens of Yirah, as it holds both the meaning of fear and awe over divine experience. If there is one thing surfers know and was felt unanimously amongst the surfers I interviewed, it is this: Surfers move between divine reverence for the ocean and have real fear of it for good reason. Erev Rav Shel Mandel, Surfing a Palace in Time, the Phenomenological Experience of God.
Thank you, Stephanie. Okay, so what is what is Rav Chell arguing here? What is it that they found from interviewing surfers, and what does this kind of remind you of? So not there yet. Yes, Wendy.
Well, I've surfed before, not there, where behind me. And you're afraid the whole time, but you're in love the whole time. It's very, very interesting. Kind of like what Paul was describing with the skies. You just really feel one with the universe at that time. And you know you can fall, you know you can get hurt. There's a lot of things that can happen. I think a lot of extreme sports are probably that same way with the rock climbing and things. So you're experiencing the divine, but there's that element that's there too, the fear.
Yeah. Other thoughts or reactions? So does this bring up anything in your own life? Yeah, we got Bonnie and then Carrie.
So I didn't grow up with a God that was horrible or fearful or anything. I really grew up with a God that was like over there, not part of my life. And that really didn't come into my life, quite frankly, till I became more observant over the last 10 or 12 years. And I think that I have this great relationship with God, and she's listening and she's around me. But there's no fear in that. But before there was no relationship.
Yeah, so it reminds me of the old saying, the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. Yeah, thank you, Bonnie. Carrie.
I was thinking about farmers and ancient peoples who were in awe of when nature cooperated, and they had wonderful, growing seasons and stuff. And then when it didn't, but there was still awe in both situations. And there's an underlying fear that something might go wrong. And in ancient times, it was the gods, plural, but these days it's singular. So I think humanity has always been in awe and fearful at the same time because of what they need to do to survive.
Yeah. Yeah, and people, excuse me. Oh. People who, kind of living in much more of a subsistent way. It's all kind of right there. I mean, if you look closely at the Torah, you can see it becomes very clear that our people were farmers. And we didn't have any source of water except for rain. Places like Babylon or even the northern kingdom of Israel had the Jordan River, the Euphrates River, or other ways of getting water. But we, the Judeans, were completely dependent on rain. And, if you did well, the rain would fall. And if you did not, you started worshiping other gods, the rain's not going to fall. And you're not going to prosper. And there's going to be famine. So yeah, this connection with nature, I think is really implicit in a lot of ways. All right, let's look at the second piece. This is from Orchat Sadakim, The Ways of the Sadakim, or The Ways of the Righteous. It's a medieval Mussar book. I've always been fascinated with it. It's got a lot of really interesting teachings. And it was also, and I've shared this before, but as a reminder to all of us, it was also written in Yiddish. And it was, oh, no. And it was not, it was written in Yiddish, and it has an anonymous author. So a lot of people think it was written by a woman. And it also uses cooking analogies, which are unlikely to be used by a male author of the Middle Ages. But in any event, can someone please read the second text?
Yirah is like a knot which secures all of the good traits, and if you remove it, all of the good traits will depart from you. All of Torah hinges upon the perfection of one's traits. The Ways of the Tzaddikim, 17.
Thank you, Joanne. Okay, I'm once again going to stop the share, and I'm going to copy that text so we can see both of these. And how does this one relate? You might remember, for those of you who were here, we looked at the soul trait of order, and there was a teaching that order was the clasp on the necklace. All of the other character traits, they were pearls,
Right.
and the clasp was order, and without the clasp, all the pearls fall off the string, and it all falls apart. But here it's making a different argument. It's Yirah that seems to be the one that's holding everything together. So I'm curious, what your thoughts are, how this might relate to the first reading, how this relates to order, what reaction you might have to it. What does this bring up for you?
I have a question.
Yes.
The use of the word perfection of one's traits. That implies that if you're not perfect, everything's going to fall apart. Am I reading that correctly? Or
Yeah, let me take a peek at it myself. That's enough. Yeah, so I think that this is sort of taking you need to kind of be working on perfecting your traits, and this does seem to be suggesting that there's not a lot of room for error, which, is a piece that I don't agree with. Something maybe to strive for, but there's no way that any of us are going to get there. That's not within human capacity. We're all imperfect. Yeah, does that make sense to you? Carrie? Joanne?
sorry, makes sense. Thank you. And I agree with you.
Yeah, I don't think we can reach perfection. It's just something, it's the path we're on. Moving towards that, or working on our character traits. But I don't think, so I don't particularly like this analogy either. But what it did remind me of when it talked about a knot is the tzitzit, which are supposed to remind you of the mitzvahs.
Yeah.
So that's all.
And those are the knots on the tallis, or the fringes that people wear. People that may not be familiar with that term. Wendy?
Well, again, it's like the consequences. It looks like it paints a picture. He's painting a picture of fear, and as a motivation. Kind of, he wants us to make sure that we know this, in order to motivate us to try, to trying to balance our traits. But it does say good traits. It does say good traits, I think, twice, and I didn't know there was any bad traits.
Hmm. There are sort of in some of the medieval and even beyond formulations of Mussar, there's sort of good traits and bad traits. And not all Mussar approaches focus as much on the spectrum. And some it's like, you got to crush the jealousy out of yourself. You got to crush the, anger out of yourself. And I don't usually quote those Mussar sources because I don't agree with them. And it's very, some Mussar writers can get really fire and brimstone, and that's not the way I see it. And that's not the way many of the modern Mussar practitioners do, certainly in the liberal Jewish world.
So if the good traits fall away, then all you have left is the bad traits.
Yeah.
That's not a good thing. So this would motivate.
Yes, whatever definition of good traits, whether it's literally good traits or whether it's just, your practice as a whole, your kind of dedication to the path. It's kind of saying, well, if you're not going to have like reverence for the divine or awe, Yirah of the divine, then you're gonna fall off the path. Maybe you agree with that, maybe you don't. But what I thought was so interesting was when we start comparing the two things, because the only thing all the surfers seemed to agree on was kind of this Yirah of the ocean. And I wonder, well, is that like, what would happen if you took that away? Could you really be a surfer if you didn't have respect for the ocean, this combination of fear and awe? What would that even mean? Why would you bother? What would you be trying to prove? What would the consequences, even if you did try it, you'd be really maybe you'd be putting your life at risk. Could similar stakes be in play for Yirah of the divine, for whatever that might mean to you? I kind of get chills when I say that. I don't know the answer, but it's not how I think about the world usually, but it's very opening for me to kind of ask that question. I'm going to share another image and then we'll head for our breakout rooms. This was from a few years ago. I don't know if you remember when this study came out, but they found a way to actually take a picture of a black hole. And this is sort of what it looks like. All the light that kind of leaks around. Why it's asymmetrical, nobody knows. But there's just a couple of quotes from the Talmud here about, if you don't know how to calculate the astronomical seasons and the movement of constellations, they don't take notice of the work of the divine. They don't see the divine's handiwork. So, our sages, our forefathers, the writer of Isaiah, the redactors of the Talmud, really understood. They lived in a world a lot more like the world that Paul experienced in Zion, where there were no gas lights in the city. There was nothing but torches and candles and oil lamps. They saw that every night. So they understood something intuitively that I think we have to travel really, really far from where we live to even get a glimpse of what they experienced every night when it wasn't cloudy. Regularly when there was no moon. Our whole calendar, our Jewish calendar, is based on the cycles of the moon. So very closely aligned with astronomical phenomena. So okay, we're gonna skip past this. So for our breakout rooms and with your partner or partners, so something that I wrote in the book, I have no doubt that if you live a life making your best efforts to live up to Jewish values, you will have a better life than if you ignore them. Each day we are faced with choice points where we can have an opportunity to take the path of least resistance or to take a higher road. So is this something that maybe awe can help us with? This thoughts, this experience of something greater than ourselves, which maybe we've had, and maybe together, try to write a mantra or a prayer that could kind of help you to kind of take that higher road as opposed to the path of least resistance.
Right.
So I'm going to put this in the chat. Oops, I do not know what just happened there. Okay, there's this in the chat. Now I will open the breakout rooms. Okay, so just click join room. And I'll see you in a few minutes.
Time.
Never have enough time.
Right.
Sorry. I wanted to have us to have a little bit of time to kind of come back together. How did that process go? Does anyone have anything they would like to share, describing the process or what you've come up with? I'll start with Nancy.
Yeah, I really loved our share, and I just feel so blessed that I was with my friends again that I've really missed. But we started talking about just different kind of things in our life. And one was because I came up with a mantra kind of immediately when we were doing this before we went into the breakout rooms. And then when we were talking and sharing, it was like, we don't know anything or everything about any situation. We just don't know. So I included that as the beginning of my mantra. So I'm going to be really focusing on this because I'm going through some issues in my life. And so I'm going to say, I don't know anything or everything, but I want to, now I can't even read this, always be open to the unexpected and possibilities.
Oh,
I love that. Thank you,
Nice.
Nancy. You want to put that in the chat?
Sure.
Please, please, please.
Okay, and Joanne, I saw your hand as well.
yeah. Well, we kind of came up with we was kind of thinking of starting off with the Serenity Prayer because, to know what we can't change and what we can change. But then I personally didn't want to have that part about accepting things we cannot change because I think people think that about themselves and then they're not on the Mussar path. So I made my own, grant me the courage to continue my Mussar journey to become more aware and improve my character traits.
Awesome. Yeah, to become more aware. Love it. Thank you. Kind of matches a little bit with what Nancy said too. We can't know,
Mhm.
maybe we can become a little bit more aware,
Mm.
a little piece of what someone else is dealing with,
In the
or
midst.
going on in the whole situation.
I couldn't see anything. Let me see.
Sarah,
The other thing,
Joanne, if you want to put yours in the chat too.
Okay.
the other thing that Joanne mentioned, and I think it's sort of relevant, was a word to the wise is sufficient. So we were kind of thinking about that as well.
Hmm.
And then I said, well, what if the person's not wise? And she said, well, then they're out of luck. But I kind of like that, a word to the wise is sufficient, because it's sort of in a way encouraging people to take the higher ground.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, you can give a word, and if it's not sufficient, might end up beating your head against the wall for a really long time and not get anywhere. And if you're invited to share that in the chat as well. Wendy.
Well, I was with Susan and she's new to our group, and a phenomenon happened. It was like we knew each other, and it's because of Mussar. So Susan, would you like to read ours? I put it in the chat already.
Sure. We started out, we each had already begun to compose a mantra, and then we put it together. And what we ended up with was, and correct me, Wendy, if didn't get it exactly right. In the midst of the world's pain and sorrow, when we reach a trailhead, help us to not fear, but to follow the arrow that leads to awe.
That's very cool.
Wow.
Yeah, we like.
That
Thank
sounds
you
good.
so much.
Thank you.
This
Thanks.
is so great. You guys are amazing. Anyone we haven't heard from yet? Oops. Okay, I'm about to try not to get bitten. The cat is still in my lap here. She's really, our daughter came home, which is wonderful, on Saturday, and Kitty's been a little unsettled by the disruption in the force, So she's just hanging out with me here. Anyone else care to share anything, any comments, and kind of what we've talked about? Oops, and there she goes. Okay, well, we
I
will
like that.
then close.
So the next time we see you, Greg, do we get to call you Rav, Greg?
Not yet. I'll still
I
be.
said the next
Rob.
time.
It's the next time.
Right.
Here's my idea for the next time, like after that kind of celebration week. What if everybody kind of bring like a poem or a psalm or a prayer or something to kind of share with the group, that maybe do that as our little celebration.
Nice.
Can you give us more parameters on the framework of the topic, please?
Well, this will be kind of our meeting after my ordination. So
Mussarish.
Mussarish, yeah, something that you find kind of, I will be entering into a new phase.
Okay, so transition, and I know it's a life cycle event, really.
Yeah. It's kind of a life cycle event, something caterpillar to butterfly-ish, perhaps.
Oh, I like it. That's a good one.
Yeah. So, okay.
Metamorphosis.
Yes, so that'll be on the 30th. So next week we will wrap up with this cycle with Yirah again, focusing more on maybe a little more on the fear, the consequences side of it. But for right now, let's close our session as we always do with a short meditation. So please close your eyes once again and get comfortable. And allow your attention to go to the light that's filtering through your eyelids. This is the light of our divine spark. It's something that's always with us. Sometimes we forget about it. Sometimes it's hard to see. But right now, allow yourself to connect with something greater. With the love and the support and the warmth. And sit for a moment in the embrace of that companionship. And when you're ready, you may open your eyes.